Yeah, so in the simplest way, really, Kratom is like the CBD of opioids. So it has a much safer profile than some of the opioid painkillers out there. But we'll talk a little bit about the pharmacology. It's very complex, similar to cannabis, right? If a scientist or a doctor talks to you about cannabis and they show you, hey, cannabis can do all these different things. It helps with anxiety and pain and muscle spasms, and works in a whole bunch of different ways. Kratom is very similar, where people are taking it for focus, they're taking it for pain, they're taking it for anxiety, they're taking it for sleep. There are multiple strains of Kratom, similar to cannabis, and each of these strains has its own chemical profile. Similar to cannabis, there are many different active ingredients, active chemicals in Kratom. So we have things like alkaloids, which are what we know most about Kratom. So there's the most common alkaloids are mitragynine and 7-hydroxymitragynine. So those are the two alkaloids that might be listed on a package of Kratom capsules or powder, because those are, again, will be the active ingredients that really help with some of the mood boosting or pain relief qualities of Kratom. But there are actually tons and tons of other alkaloids in there. We're just discovering some of them, or we're just uncovering really what receptors they bind to and things like that. We didn't do a lot of research on Kratom until very recently. So we really didn't know what was in it. It was like, okay, people have been using this for, thousands of years in other cultures, and, no one's died from it. It seems safe, but really, how safe is it? How does it work and things like that? These things were really being teased apart in the last 5 years. But for the layperson, the major activity of Kratom is at the opioid receptors, and specifically a subtype called the mu opioid receptor, or MOR. We know that there's multiple chemicals in these strains of Kratom, and some are activating the mu opioid receptor, some are antagonizing it or blocking it. It's very similar to cannabinoids, right? When we think about cannabinoids, there's some that block certain receptors or some that activate them. They work in all different ways. And so we have an opioid system in our body, and it's really important. And it's funny because the opioid epidemic in the medical system right now has sort of really stigmatized our own opioid system, because, we don't want people overdosing and dying from opioid painkillers. So we sort of stopped the conversation about opioids, but we make our own opioids inside our bodies. We make endorphins, we make enkephalins, we make all different types of these endogenous opioids. And so for many diseases, there are actual deficiencies. There's endorphin deficiencies, for example, in my disease, fibromyalgia, where you have this chronic pain syndrome, and part of it is because your body's acting almost like it's in withdrawal from opioids. But even if you've never used an opioid before, your body's acting like it just doesn't have enough of its own opioids, so you're in pain all the time. You have rigid muscles, you can't focus. There are a lot of things that go on when you have endorphin deficiency. We're starting to learn that there are other diseases that might be linked to endorphin deficiency or have that as a feature. So it's really interesting that our bodies might not have a highly functioning endorphin system. And should the solution be to put you on, opioid painkillers, which you can overdose on, you can die from, or is there other natural plant medicine solutions? Now, why is Kratom a safer option than prescription opioids? And why isn't it a prescription? Let's go to that. So first off, opioid painkillers have the ability to cause overdose and death because those opioids will bind to a center in your brain called the brainstem, and it will literally cause a pathway to be activated that shuts down breathing. That's called respiratory depression. So the more opioids you take, what happens is you end up dying in your sleep. And that's a common feature from almost all opioids. Some of the, more powerful opioids like fentanyl, right, can cause that really quickly at very small dose. Some of the safer ones, of course, you can take more and it doesn't have that effect until you take quite a lot of it. And those are considered more safer opioids like tramadol. But all opioids have that function. What's really interesting about Kratom is that, again, this is a ground up green leaf of a plant that is related to the coffee family. So, it's very different. We're not talking about like prescription pressed capsules or something that a doctor prescribes. We're talking about a powder people take as tea or capsules or things like that. Looks very much like matcha green tea. The kratom powder is really interesting because, again, the kratom will activate these opioid receptors, but it doesn't activate the downstream pathways that cause respiratory depression. So it's interesting. It's causing pain relief. It's causing, mood boosting. It's causing attention, but it's not activating the pathway that causes death. What we're seeing with consumers of kratom, there have been some reports, in the news of kratom users who have died, but we see that they have also drank a lot of alcohol, or they were on other medications like Xanax, for example, that might, cause respiratory depression. And so kratom by itself will not kill you. And again, and we have about 10 million users in the United States alone. So if it was causing respiratory depression, if it was an issue, we would see this. Very similar to cannabis and CBD, right? You can't die from cannabis. You can't die from CBD. And for pain patients, this is really, really key, because this is a horrible, horrible thing where pain patients accidentally take too many opioids, or they get addicted and things like that. Like, this is a real problem. But chronic pain patients need to have solutions. They can't just say, well, don't be on opioid pain pills. Well, if you can't manage your pain, you can't function, you can't work. And a lot of pain patients are on disability and at home because they can't manage their pain without some of the drugs that now, because of the opioid epidemic, doctors have really limited access to. So it's interesting. Kratom also again, because it has all these different chemicals in it, it has activities outside of the opioid receptors as well. We're learning that it can activate dopamine receptors, serotonin receptors, acetylcholine receptors. It can, even do things like actually change some of the enzymes and actually boost levels of your own neurotransmitters. So it has a broad activity, whether it's antioxidants, anti-inflammatories, muscle relaxing effects. It has so many different effects. And so we really have this one substance that seems to have a lot of potential for wellness. It seems to have sort of an entourage effect, as we see with cannabis, where all these different components come together to do some really cool things. Some of them may not be safe by themselves, as we've seen with THC. When you just, give THC by itself to somebody in the form of Marinol, that there are some, side effects and things like that. So it's really interesting to explore what each of these components do for wellness, but also what they do as a whole, and how these different strains and their different, combinations of these chemicals have. So it's a very exciting field. It's very new. But again, it's something that is rapidly developing, and the research every single day is coming out, sort of just as fast as cannabis research was.